In August of 2025, we were admitted to the hospital. It was a planned admission. He was going to be receiving chemo and immunotherapy. The same chemo and immunotherapy he had been receiving every 3 weeks for the last year plus. It was routine. There was nothing strange about it. There was nothing unexpected about it. We were going to the hospital like normal. He was getting his same meds like normal. And long story short, once they started the medication, he started to decline very fast. So much so that they had to stop all the medications, and they had to call a rapid response and send him down to the PICU because he was having labored breathing, because his lungs were filling up with fluid. So they did that. We were in the PICU, and they decided that they wanted to biopsy the fluid that was in his lungs to see where it was coming from. When they did that, they found cancer cells in it. And at this point, this was his fourth relapse. And so at this point, we knew we had exhausted all of our options, and we knew there wasn't much that they could do, but we were still hopeful. We never lost hope. And so we consulted with the doctor, and she said, let's do radiation. So we did some radiation. I can't remember how many days. I want to say 5. I don't know, somewhere around there. And he just kept declining, and eventually she came in and sat us down and said, I think it's time that we introduce you to the hospice team. Hospice doesn't always mean the end, but they are a very valuable resource that can make your life easier. They can come to your house to do blood draws so that you don't have to drive to the clinic. They can come check on him at any hour of the day in the middle of the night so that you are not calling us or having to drive here in the middle of the night. And that was really scary, having to hear that. And I wasn't completely sold on it, because I was willing to drive to the hospital in the middle of the night to save him. I was willing to do all of that. Making those kinds of things easier was the least of my worries. But we agreed to meet with them, and they came in and with Child Life, and basically they came in and told us everything we didn't want to hear. And we called our family, and everybody flew in, and they lifted the visitor limitation so that everybody could be there. And they brought a second bed into his room so that the 3 of us could sleep together and both sleep on each side of him comfortably. And looking back, I think they really thought he was going to die like that day, because they had put us in a room that was back in the corner. They had put the butterfly sign on the door. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, it means that they are losing their child. It's basically a do not disturb sign. And so they were coming in and out of our hospital room 24/7, always assessing him, and were obviously telling us, like, yes, he is declining. You might start to see this, or you might start to see that. And all of that was so hard to hear. I did not want to believe any of it. I don't think I ever did believe any of it. But he was not really getting better despite the radiation. And they were urging us to go home. They're like, I think it's best that you go home where he's comfortable. I think all of you will be much happier there. And I just remember thinking, like, no, this is where we save him. Why wouldn't he stay at the hospital? There's something wrong with him. Why would you send him home? And they were just like, because he's not going to get better. And he deserves to be at home where he's comfortable and not die in the hospital. I could not accept that. I did not want to go home, but everybody else did. And so that's what we did. And Bryson was too fragile to travel by car, so they had to bring him home in an ambulance. It was a 2.5-hour drive. So that way in the ambulance he was able to still keep getting his pain medications because he was in a lot of pain. And so they brought him home. And when we got home, there was 3 hospice staff there waiting for us, and they had already completely taken over our home. There was a hospital bed in the middle of our room with an oxygen concentrator and a bunch of oxygen tanks. There was a wheelchair, there was a shower chair, there was a suction machine, and there was a bedside table full of medications. And the EMTs brought Bryson into the room and got him settled into his hospital bed and hooked up to the pumps and everything, while I sat outside with one of the hospice nurses as he kind of introduced himself, introduced what hospice is, that kind of stuff. And I just have to say that this hospice program was not a pediatric hospice program, and that made a world of difference. Like that, I hope this never happens to anybody, but if your child is ever placed on hospice, please choose a pediatric hospice program, because what we went through was injustice, to say the least. I mean, that's a true understatement, but that's... Anyways, so the hospice nurse and I were sitting outside, and we were talking and about hospice and, you know, what it was going to look like. He explained that there was going to be a caregiver 24/7, because Bryson was considered critical care, so we were going to have a nurse there all the time. Just those kinds of things. They explained the medications and like what his schedule was going to be like and that kind of stuff. And then he starts talking about end of life arrangements. And he goes, I know it's really hard to think about that right now, but I always urge families to start planning that now, as opposed to waiting until after it happens, because after it happens, your emotions are involved and you might not think clearly and make rational decisions. And I just remember thinking to myself, I have been living this life for 3 years. My emotions are making all of my decisions. I'm probably not making rational decisions. I'm already there. And whether I'm planning my son's funeral 3 days before he dies or the day after he dies, neither of them seem better than the other. So I just was in complete shock that he said that to us, especially the first day we got home. The day that we were meeting everybody and seeing our house look like a hospital room, and all of this is so new to us, and we are trying to take this moment by moment, and they're just throwing stuff at us. And again, I think it's because that's their job. It's their everyday, you know, it's just routine for them. They don't think about it. But for the families, that is so hard to hear. So the first night went good. Our hospice nurse explained that there are 3 phases of dying, and he told us that he believed he was still in the first stage. And I was very upfront with him in the beginning. I said, I do not want you to sugarcoat anything. I want you to be as blunt as possible, and I do not care how devastating it is. I need you to be honest with me. I need you to tell me how it is. Like, I want to know everything to expect. I would not want to be blindsided by anything. Because at that point we had already experienced like significant trauma. And for example, in the hospital before they discharged us, there was a point where Bryson woke up, and out of nowhere he started grabbing his throat and saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And that sent me. I ran out of the hospital room. I'm not joking, I ran. And I was running up and down the hallway, just yelling, he can't breathe, he can't breathe, somebody come help, he can't breathe. And I just collapsed on the floor. And the nurses came rushing in, and there was one nurse that sat by me in the hallway and got down on the floor with me. And she was like, I understand that this is so hard, but you have to be there for him. You can't let him see you do this. And I'm so thankful she said that to me, because she was absolutely right. He didn't deserve to see me like that. I should not have abandoned him in that room, but I felt so helpless, and I was so scared to see that and to hear those words and to know what was coming and that it was only going to get worse. And I just couldn't believe it was happening. So she walked me in there, and she was able to somehow talk me off the ledge. To this day, she is one of the greatest nurses that we ever had. And I'm so fortunate for her. I'm so grateful for her. So when we got home, I told him that. I said, I don't want to see any of that. I don't want to hear any gasping. I don't want him to complain of anything. I don't want to hear him whine about a single thing. I want him to be as comfortable as possible. I do not want him to have any complaints. So whatever we have to do, that's what I want to do. And whatever you have to tell me so that we can do those things, I want you to tell me. And so they started explaining things like, okay, well, he's going to start secreting out of his mouth. And he's going to develop the death rattle. And to counteract that, we can give him a medication that will essentially just kind of dry up all that extra saliva so that he is not gurgling on his own spit. And one of the biggest things that was so hard was balancing his pain medication and how much we wanted him to be awake. Because it was so hard that he was sleeping all the time, and we weren't able to see him and his personality and his smile and his eyes and hear his voice and talk to him and listen to music with him and play games with him. We wanted him to be awake as much as possible so that we could get as much time with him as possible. But he was in so much pain that we had to give him so many pain meds, and unfortunately it just made him sleep, which sucked. But again, you can't be selfish. You have to make the decision that's best for them, and that was giving him the pain medicine that he needed so that he could be comfortable. And his pain increased so fast. In one day, we had doubled his morphine. In one day, his morphine dosage that he was getting in the IV pump was by the end of the day, it was 10 times stronger than what we had started at in the beginning of the day. Like, that's how fast his pain was progressing and breaking through the pain meds. And you could visibly see tumors that were growing on him out of control. I have never seen something grow so fast, literally by the hour. Like, just getting bigger and bigger and more and expanding and just taking over more and more of his body. And he was explaining to us about how he's not going to want to eat as much anymore, and he's not going to want to drink as much anymore, and he's going to stop going to the bathroom as often. And we just knew that he still had to do those things. Like, just because he didn't have the ability doesn't mean he wasn't hungry. We still had to feed him. And hearing them say, by giving him G-tube feedings, or, pushing water through his G-tube to hydrate him, you're really only prolonging his suffering and prolonging death. He said, you're basically interfering with what the body needs to do to die. And again, everything they were telling us just felt like they were doing the exact opposite of caring for him. And after caring for him for 3 years, it was so hard to accept the fact that we were stepping back and we were taking our hands off. And I couldn't. But that all did start to happen. They were right about everything. He did stop eating. At one point, he wanted to get down out of bed because he said he had to go to the bathroom. And when he stood up, he said, "Why can't I walk?" And I remember that night, after hearing that, and seeing these tumors growing out of control, like uncontrollably all over his body, I fell to the ground, and I just remember punching the floor over and over again and just screaming as loud as I could. I was so angry, and I was so heartbroken, and I was so confused. And my husband got down on the floor with me and said, "I know, I'm really sorry, this sucks." And then he reminded me again that Bryson's still here. He can still hear me, he can still see what I'm doing, and if I react that way, it will scare him, which it did. And so I had to put on a brave face, and act like nothing was wrong. When your kids see you break down, they know that means something is wrong. And for a kid going through something that's scary, that's the last thing they need, is to be even more scared because now their parents are scared. And so the next day, he was declining slowly. We were watching all the changes that they said would come. But when they told us these changes were gonna come, they still didn't prepare us like they should have. They still didn't explain like they should have, looking back on it. And the day he died, first of all, the day before that, he did what they call the rally, which is when they appear to be getting better all of a sudden, and they're more alert, and they're moving, and they're talking, and you think, "Oh my gosh, this is what we've been waiting for. They're finally turning a corner," just to be met with the devastation of the hospice nurse saying, "No, that's not what's happening." Still, I did not believe it. I did not accept it. I wanted to believe what I wanted to believe, and I did not lose hope. And then the next day, again, he was back to where he was before the rally. He was asleep, and he had the death rattle. He was taking very short, shallow breaths that were very uneven. He would take like 3 breaths at once, and then he would pause for like 30 seconds, and then we would just stare at him, and then he would take a breath. And it was like that for like days. I mean, we did not get much sleep. We were up 24 hours. We did not want to miss anything, and we certainly didn't want to miss it if it was going to happen while we were asleep. We did not want that. And so I made it very clear with our hospice nurse that I wanted him to tell us in real time the changes he was seeing so that we could be prepared. This hospice team was not for pediatrics, and it showed. And unfortunately, I will never recommend them. They have I just wouldn't recommend them. They were very understaffed at the time, and we were told that Bryson would have a nurse there 24/7, and that was not the case. And we were upset about that because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what to look for. We didn't know any of this. We were not the people to be in charge of this. That was not our job. And we were very upset about that, and we were very vocal about that. And one day, they sent out this nurse who, she wasn't even a nurse yet. She was still in nursing school. I think she was I want to say like a CNA or an LPN or an LVN, something like that. And she didn't even know how to use the blood pressure cuff. My mother-in-law, who was an RN, had to show her how to use the blood pressure cuff. And by no means is this her fault. She was the cutest little young nurse in nursing school. Like, you could tell that she was so ambitious and excited, and you could also tell that she was shocked to come into a home where there was a dying child, as I would imagine anybody would be if they're unprepared for it. But yeah, she didn't know how to use the blood pressure cuff. So that is just an example of kind of what we were dealing with. And then I will never forget the time there was an instance where his IV pump was running out of morphine, and it was one of the times that we didn't have a nurse there with us, and we kept calling the pharmacy to see when they were going to drop off a new bag of morphine, and they kept saying, well, we don't have it ready, it's not ready yet. And then the bag ran out, and he started to wake up, and he was writhing in pain. I've never seen something like that. He was in so much pain, and he was so weak. He couldn't talk. He was just whimpering and like just raising his arms in the air because that was the most he could move because it hurt so bad. And we were frantic. We were calling the 24/7 hotline. We were trying to get a hold of our case manager. We were trying to get a hold of the hospice doctor. Nobody was answering us. Like, nothing was happening. We were using the code on the pump that they gave us, and that wasn't even working, and nobody was willing to help us. And for hours, we sat there, phone call after phone call, trying to get a hold of somebody to come out and bring us more pain medication because we could not make it clear enough that he was in so much pain. And for hours, I mean, that's a long time when you're in pain. Hours is long enough as it is, but when you are in pain, every second feels like an hour. And to watch that and to hear that was so terrible and just unacceptable. Like, that is not how anybody should live out their dying moments in pain like that. That is not peaceful. And then the day that he died, we were sitting on the bed next to him, and his hospice nurse, who had been, all of them typically just sat on the couch and kind of sat back so that the family could be around him, and they only stepped in when they needed to either take his vitals or, well, not take his vitals, they stopped doing that. But to administer meds or, just to look him over and that kind of stuff. So they just kind of sat in the background unless they were needed. But this time the hospice nurse got up and walked over to him, and I could tell that it was different. He was walking differently. There was like an urgency in his step. And I immediately looked at him and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I just have noticed a change in his breathing." And I said, "Okay, what does that mean?" He was like, "Well, I can't quite say, but it could be happening." And yeah, all of a sudden his breathing was like, it was so shallow. Like, I've never seen somebody breathe like that before. It was like just the faintest little like I can't even mimic it. And it was quick. It was very like quick, which it had not been prior to that. And he had lost like all the color in him, in his lips and his eyes and his skin, and he was so skinny, and all you could see were his tumors and just his bones, and his eyes were sunken in, and he looked like he was dying. And so I yelled for my mom to come in the room. I was holding one hand, and my husband was holding his other hand. And I remember just wanting to run out of that room. I was so scared, and I didn't want to see that. But I knew I had to. I couldn't miss that. And so I just held his hand, and I put my other hand on his head, and I just put my face down right here on him, just on his shoulder next to his neck. I just buried my face in there, and I just remember I was shaking uncontrollably, and I was so anxious that I had to move my body somehow. I was just like kicking my legs, and I couldn't sit still, and I was fighting back the urge to just run out of that room and scream. And nobody was saying a word. It was dead silent, and it was like that for a while, a good like solid 2 minutes of just pure silence and nobody looking at each other. And when I lifted up my head, I really wanted to ask, like, did it happen? But I didn't want to sound stupid. And so I just stared at him. And he wasn't breathing. And I just looked at the hospice nurse. And I said, I didn't even say anything. I was just looking at him with, I don't even know that it was hope in my eyes. I just did not want him to tell me what I already knew. And he called the time of death. And something I was not prepared for was the fact that when you die, your body excretes anything it was holding in. And because he had a G-tube, it came out of there. And so all of this stomach contents came out. And that was really jarring to see. And almost immediately after he called the time of death, this nurse started tearing off dressings. I mean, at this point, Bryson was covered in dressings. He had a chest tube. He had his port covering. He had a covering over his G-tube. He had stickers on his face to hold the oxygen cannula. He had stickers everywhere, tape to hold everything in place, and this nurse just started ripping everything off. And I wanted to scream. And I stopped him and I said, "What are you doing?" And I thought to myself, you wouldn't do this if he was alive. You wouldn't be this aggressive if you were changing his dressings while he was still alive, so why are you doing this? And I told him, I said, "Stop. I will do this. You need to stop." And I asked for it. He said, "Remove her." And I gently removed every piece of tape that was on his body. And we gave him a bath. And we put him in a fresh pair of pajamas that he never even got to wear. And by that time we had called the morgue and they told us, "You can take as long as you want. You just tell us when you want us to come get him." And so we kept him there for 6 hours. He died at 5 and they came to get him at 11. And Paxton was not in the room when it happened. We felt that that was best. As a child, that is something so traumatic to witness. I didn't want that to replay in his brain for the rest of his life. So after it happened, after we gave him his bath, I got him all settled and put fresh sheets on the bed and a fresh blanket on him and everything. We went to go get Paxton, which he was in the house, he just wasn't in the room. And we had no idea what to tell him or what to say. We did not rehearse anything. We just walked in there and I don't even remember what he was doing, but he was just being a kid. And we sat down next to him and we were like, I don't even remember what we said. I think we said, "Go see went to heaven," or I know we didn't say he died. I know we didn't say that. I don't remember what we said, but we told him in what we felt was a comforting way. And immediately he broke down. Immediately. And he wanted to see him. And so we brought him upstairs to see him. And when he walked in, he was just it's one thing to see your child die. It's one thing to see your child die. But it's a totally other thing to see your other child witness that and grieve their sibling like that and see their sibling in that condition. Nothing could have prepared me for that. Nothing could have prepared me for anything. The hospice team did such a horrible job at preparing and explaining things. And so we just sat there with him. And I caressed his head and I just kept kissing him and holding his hand. And then the morgue came. We heard him pull up. And I could hear them unloading the gurney from the back of the van. And he walked up to the door. And he said, he was very polite. He was the kindest man. And he said, I'm here. I'm just going to wait outside. And you guys take your time and come out when you're ready. And so we got all of his stuff together. We sent him to the morgue with his Thomas backpack filled with his favorite things, his favorite trains. And at the time we were living with my in-laws, and so my husband is the eldest of all of his siblings. All of his younger siblings are still kids. They're under 18. And there's 4 of them. And so if you add Paxton to that, there's 5. And we let each of the kids pick out something, whatever they wanted, something meaningful, or it didn't even have to be meaningful, just something they wanted to send with him. And we did. We packed his backpack, and I was really worried that they were going to bring in a body bag. I did not want to see that. And so instead he said, you can just wrap him in the sheet that he's laying on. And so when I went to do that, rigor had already set in, and so his body was very stiff and very cold. And I just wrapped the sheets over him. And I scooped him up. And I just held him. And I walked out. And every second of that felt so surreal. I could not believe I was carrying my dead child and handing him over to the mortuary. And I placed him on the gurney. And they wheeled him to the van. And I just walked behind. And they put him in the back of the van. And they put this covering over him. It was kind of like a tarp, but it wasn't a tarp. And I just remember being able to see the curve of his head underneath it. And just knowing that that was my kid laying in the back of that van, covered up. Because at that point he was a dead body. None of it feels real. And we just stood in the driveway and watched them pull away. And we went back inside. My husband and I got ready to lay down and finally, hopefully, get some sleep. And as soon as we got in bed, we noticed right in the middle was his Thomas pillow. Right where he slept. And we both just broke down, realizing that this is now our life. And I remember that first night, it felt wrong, like sleeping right next to my husband. Because Goosey never allowed that. He never allowed us to cuddle. He had to be the center of our attention. We had to cuddle with him. We were not allowed to cuddle with each other. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my God, he would hate this. He would be so mad that I'm cuddling with my husband right now because he's not here in my bed because he's dead. And the next morning, the house was quiet. There was no alarms. There was no medications that needed to be given. There was no diapers to change. There was no Nobody requesting a fresh sippy cup of cold white milk. And it was just silent. And it was awful. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And this is why I think it's so important to be as open as I am on the internet. I don't do it for attention. And I don't do it because it's easy. I do it because I wish so badly that I had had somebody like that on our journey to explain everything, but in a comforting way, in a way that made sense. And that's just what I try to be for people, is the person I wish I had, every version of the person I wish I had on the entire journey from the day he was diagnosed to the day he died. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to choose a pediatric hospice team. People who know pediatrics, people who know how to handle families like this. People dying is a tragedy, but kids dying is such a fragile situation that I believe requires specific training. And unfortunately, our team did not have that. And I would not wish that on anybody. What we went through with our hospice team, I would not wish that on anybody. It was awful, and it was not peaceful, and it was not what he deserved.